Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the second session of the Certificate Course in Dialogue Studies 2020-21. Today, we have the privilege of having Professor Farhat Nasreen with us. Professor Nasreen is a full professor at the Department of Jamia Millia Islamia. She taught military history to the cadets of the Indian Military Academy, IMA, Dehradun, before joining JMI. She is an author of 5 books and 18 articles. Professor Nasreen, you're welcome.
Okay, can I begin, Behzad?
Yes, ma'am, over to you.
Okay, great, right. So,
and ma'am, I'm sorry. One more announcement for all participants. Please keep your cameras turned on and your microphones turned off. Please turn on your microphone only when you have to speak. Others, please keep it off. Otherwise, there is noise in the background. Yes, ma'am. Please. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to Mr. Behzad Fatmi for giving me this grand opportunity. I really love, talking to people, especially on this very important subject of, how to communicate, because a lot of things that can be resolved simply by communication, we miss out on kind of, resolving them by the first and the most easy method available to us. So today we've come together to basically discuss and talk about the history of intercultural dialogue in India, right? So when we talk about intercultural dialogue in Indian history, we know that India is a huge space in terms of, its geographical content. It's absolutely massive, known to be a subcontinent, of course. And also climatically, we have got various regions which are so very different from each other. So that variability is also there. So having said that, you find, that we have a space and we have a content, which is the climatic content, which predisposes us to have a lot of cultural variation in any case. Even if there were no people coming from anywhere outside the subcontinent itself, then also we would have had a lot of cultural variation and maybe we would have handled it differently. But today we are talking about in the way that we've actually handled it, right? So if we begin off, with the earliest of the early periods, if we talk about, say, the Harappan Civilization, right? So we must, whenever we talk about civilizations and we're talking about dialogue, we must understand that there are various parameters in which what kind of a dialogue is happening needs to be seen. So, there'll be various lenses which can be used to understand where a dialogue is happening and who has an upper hand in that dialogue, right? So in this context, if you look at the class differentiation, that becomes a very important lens through which we can see what dialogue is happening, right? So that and the class difference lens will remain throughout the history, and it is there even now, so that the class difference lens is not going to change. It's continuing, right? The other thing is the other parameters will change from time to time. Say, for example, you have people from other land who are coming, who bring in their own culture. That's one thing. Then region wise, you have people with different kind of eating habits, or people who've got a different language. That is another parameter. Then you may have a gender-based parameter or whatever else, but the class differentiation thread will keep running through all of this, through everything. Now in this context, you would find that in the Harappan Valley civilization too, about which we know very little actually, because the script has not been deciphered, so we don't know that much about it. But we still know at least this much, that there was a flow of wealth which was happening from the rural sector to the urban sector, right? And even though you may not have studied history, but from your school text, whatever you might have read there, you would know that the Harappan Valley civilization was, a marvel of its times. So you had the citadel, you had well-planned roads, you had, well-built houses, and so on and so forth. But you find that there is a flow of money which is happening from one direction, that is the agrarian sector, into the urban sector. Therefore, you find that the rich are somehow exploiting the poorer sections. And then, you find that there is an equation of superiority and inferiority as early as the Harappan. The other thing which will happen gradually is when the Harappan Valley civilization eventually goes down. So again, there are a number of theories why it went down, because, you'd say that it went down because there was a great flood, or, there was a great epidemic, because you find that there are mass graves there. Then we're trying to understand what was the religion, what were the beliefs of the people of the Harappan Valley. All that is, it's in the kind of, it's in a gray zone. So nobody really knows what their beliefs were, but there are speculations of various kinds, right? So that having said that, the next phase that we find in the Indian subcontinent's context is the agriculture, Gangetic. Okay. So in the Gangetic Valley, you suddenly find that the Harappan Valley civilization is gone. And there is another thing which is happening, which is the cultivation of land in the Gangetic Valley. Now, when historians study this cultivation, they say that the Gangetic Valley, agriculture could not have developed unless you had a class of people who were richer than the laborers who are actually cutting down jungles, right? And this, we are talking literally, a phase which is touching the Neolithic phase. It's a very, very early phase in settled agriculture. So even when we are talking about the very early phase in settled agriculture, we find that there is a class variation where you have a set of laborers who are being used by big guys who got the money to buy, iron and make iron implements, make them cut down jungles, make them work, make money, and then that money is going to get transferred into what is known as the janpads. So you then have a system where you have small kind of tribal, state-like setup, small tribal units of governance will come up. And then within these tribal units of governance, you will have a hierarchy. And you would find that in this hierarchy, the social interaction of the richer element or the more stronger element with the poorer working class is going to be minimal. So that interaction is going to be only in the capacity of, taking work from them, or, kind of telling them what their space is. So now this becomes very important. How do you solidify and tell them that you've got a certain place in society and you're not going to exceed that? So there'll be various kinds of modes which will be used. Say, for example, there'll be a complete, stereotyping of a particular group of people. So the poorer people will have a certain, a certain social identity attached to them. And then there'll also be an ideology which will grow over a period of time to substantiate the social identity that has been stuck with them. So then you find that these guys who were originally poor, they will not be in a position to move upwardly, right? So there is, there are two kinds of social movements which are possible. One is the horizontal movement where you make more money. Okay, so say supposing I'm earning 2,000 rupees today, and then or maybe I'm earning whatever 20,000 rupees today, and then if I move upward, then I'll be earning 40,000. I might be earning 60,000, a lakh of rupees. That's upward mobility. The other thing is horizontal mobility. So horizontal mobility is I'm earning 20,000. I will earn 20,000. Only I am not increasing my income, but I do some other work. So maybe I was earning 20,000 as a tailor. Now I earn 20,000 as a teacher, or I may be earning 20,000 as a business entrepreneur. So that is horizontal mobility. So the thing is that if you allow, if we are talking about the early agrarian period when you have the janpads that I'm talking about. So if you allow horizontal mobility, that means this poor labor class that you had collected for your agrarian purposes, you are going to lose them, because they'll say, well, we don't want to do agriculture, we want to do something else. So therefore, you have to cap, you have to stop, not just vertical mobility, but also horizontal mobility, because you don't want to lose that class of laborers. So then you find that, and how do you perpetuate this, that you cannot change your profession, you can't move anywhere. So you are basically, you give them a set of arguments. See, because the people who give arguments are actually always the thinking class. And let me tell you that thinking intellectually requires time. Okay? It is not something that you can, do randomly. There'll be very few people, some really brilliant minds, who would be thinking even when they don't have 2 square meals. Otherwise, generally people who are into this, business of doing intellectual activity, it's a very time consuming process. And then to put your thoughts in order and in such a way that they become the word of law. So that is what is done. So then you find that you argue in such a way that you stop any kind of a conversation with the lower sections or the lower strata of the society. So you will now have a mass of working class, the laborers in the agrarian sector. We don't have an industrial sector, we don't have an urban sector. It's all in all agrarian sector, in which you have people who are working and doing some kind of menial work, and then you don't have any dialogue with them, because you say that, well, you will not understand the language that we speak. And the language that I'm talking about is not the bhasha. The language is basically, the philosophy that we know of, the intellectualism that we have, the arguments that we have to offer. You will not be able to understand. So there's no question of, talking. So then you find, that there is a growth of a kind of a political system. And then gradually, as you find that there is more of agricultural land that comes into, into cultivation. So there's more money which is made. And eventually from the small janpads that we were talking about, we'll go into bigger states, which are known as the Mahajanpads, right? So then you have bigger states. The bigger states will have bigger machinery of exploitation. They'll have an officerial class, which will again create a lot of argument at the socio-cultural level, which differentiates between the poorer classes and the richer classes. So the earliest, the earliest gap that you will find where dialogue is being forbidden or dialogue is being avoided is because of a class-based difference. Okay, it's not because of any kind of a religious or a ideological difference which is of any other type. It is purely class based. There is the only thing which is working here is money relations, and money relations are dictating that there is going to be no dialogue between 2 sets of people, and one set is the majority of the deprived fellows. Right, so we have this. Then you have the Mahajanpads, and once you have the Mahajanpads, gradually you would find that you have huge, tracts of land which are owned by a few governing houses. And then gradually you will find that, yeah? Yeah?
Junaid, your phone turned on. Please turn it off and turn on your camera.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So, you find that there is now, right, so you have the Mahajanpads, and then gradually you would find that the Mahajanpads will also dissolve. Now, why will they dissolve? They'll dissolve because the local powerhouses, I mean at the village level, those local powerhouses will become in itself powerful enough to disobey this big authority that you have at the Mahajanpad level, right? So then you will find that power will become completely fragmented and scattered. Now, in this scattered scenario of power, you will have a number of political changes, which in turn will trigger off a lot of cultural changes and social changes as well. Now, one of the first recorded histories of Hindustan, in a history which has been recorded in a very systematic way, it comes from Kashmir, which is the Raj Tarangini of a man called Kalhan. Okay, and Kalhan's Raj Tarangini was later on translated into Persian. It is in fact translated into Persian twice, because it was supposed to be, one of the most important texts telling us how politics was being unleashed in the region of Kashmir. And as the word says, as the title of this book says, Raj Tarangini, it means waves of political change. See, Raj is, the governance, and Tarangini is waves. So in Raj Tarangini, our author Kalhan tells us about the various dynasties who ruled over Kashmir. Now, the interesting part in this is that these guys in Kashmir in the 8th century already are in touch with a lot of people from the northwest frontier side, right? And because we'll find a lot of a lot of entry of various kinds of tribes and new races and new ethnic groups who are going to come into Hindustan from the northwestern side, from the northwestern frontier to be very precise. And why from the northwestern frontiers? Because you have passes from there, you have passes in the mountains from where people used to come here. So Kushans wahin se aaye, ancient period mein Kushans aaye, Huns aaye, और जब कुशान्स आए, then they brought a lot of cultural change with them. Say for example, they brought the stirrup, जो घोड़े में जो stirrup use होती है. They brought the trousers, because जब trousers जब तक नहीं थे और stirrup नहीं थे, तो आप अगर horse riding कर भी रहे थे, तो it was very difficult to do that. And that is why you will find that before they came, the mode for the warriors, the mode of movement for the warriors were the chariots. Because अगर आप महाभारत पढ़ेंगे, so you will find that we are talking about chariots. But later on, you find that it is about an individual soldier who's a cavalryman. And then, of course, the trousers, because they made movement much more easy for the soldiers. So even in fact, if you're even talking about the agrarian sector, in the earlier period, you find that even in a plow, जो plow होती है, उसमें भी जो bullocks लगाते थे, there were 5-6 bullocks in one plow. So then later on, when you have a better harnessing system, then a single bullock or 2 bullocks are harnessed in a plow, because the harnessing becomes better, and you have carpenters who will do this for you. So you find, that there is a change. Now, when you think about the Turks, interestingly, the earliest of the Indian sources, indigenous Hindustani sources, when they spoke about the Turks, they did not refer to the Turks as Muslims. They refer to them as the Turushk. So that is very interesting, because these people, they are not being identified by their religion. They are being identified by their ethnicity. So therefore, and because this is a very important thing, that you are not using religion as a marker of difference. And like I have said to you earlier, that the real marker of difference from time immemorial has been money. It has always been money. And if you can, you pick up any time, from the ancient most time to the modern most time, you will find that money is the biggest driving force in any society. So anyways, we'll come to that later. But here you find that these guys identify the Turks as the Turushk and not as Muslims. But let me tell you, when you read James Mill is the man who is who's a British author, who is responsible for periodization of Indian history into 3 periods. And he calls it the Hindu period, the Muslim period, and the modern period. How interesting is that? If you are identifying the ancient period as the Hindu period and the medieval period as the Muslim period, then in the 3rd period, the Christians were ruling here. So why don't you say that that is the Christian period? You say that that is the modern period, because you are co-identifying Christianity with modernity, or you don't want to use that marker, or you are trying to, tell, because all these, the work, like say, for example, this particular work of James Mill, these are all driving forces which, led to the partition of the country. So this is, like it's a big deal when you mark history with markers like this and then you profess it, right? So because आप हिंदुस्तानी जो हैं खुद वो तो कह नहीं रहे हैं, लेकिन आप जब बहुत सालों बाद जब आप लिख रहे हैं तो आप उसको इस तरह से break कर रहे हैं into this kind of a periodization, right? So when I was telling you about Turks, right? So we find that when the Turks arrive, you find that there'll be a major cultural change, and there'll be the need for more of dialogue, more of exchange, more of understanding, because the Turks will occupy a huge part of the Hindustani subcontinent, especially the North Indian part, a lot of it. And then they are highly centralized. So, they are highly centralized, and the main agenda that they have, also remember that the main agenda that they have is not about spreading any religion here. The main agenda is making money. They have the same agenda. So no matter who is ruling here, the agenda of the ruling class is always making money. That is what it will be. So you find when the Turks come here, they are people who are very different from what the indigenous indigenous groups were, जिनके ऊपर वो अब rule करेंगे, which is, and this happens in the second battle of Tarain, which is 1192, and this battle was won by Muizzuddin Muhammad Sam, popularly known as Muhammad Wari. Okay. Now, before we talk about the Turks, let me just tell you one thing about the Turks themselves, that the Turks were people who were, who were a warrior class, supposed to be emanating from a place called Anatolia, spread all over Central Asia. They used to work for a number of, various states which were coming up in the post-Mohammedan scenario, where you have a number of sultanates which had come up. And a lot of Turks used to work for the Persians, because the Persians are an ancient civilization which has a history of, of a centralized ruling class. वो पहले ज़ोरोएस्ट्रियन हैं, उसके बाद में जब इस्लाम में वो कन्वर्ट हो जाएंगे तो फिर वो मुसलमान हैं. लेकिन ये तुर्क जो हैं, जो Turks हैं, they used to be working for all of these guys. Eventually the Turks would also convert to Islam over a period of time. Once they convert to Islam, then you find that Islam in itself, it had a focus on centralization. Now, why did Islam had a focus on centralization? It had a focus because the Quran, it has a take on everything. So Quran would have a take on the social position of, various people in a society. It has a take on the property rights of, men and women. It has a take on all kinds of personal and political and, economic laws and so on and so forth. It has a take on the political order. It has a take on, how governance has to be done, what is justice, and so on and so forth. So if the Muslims were thinking as rulers, if they thought that they have to implement these ideas, then it could be implemented only when you had a centralized government and you also had substantial and effective control over the areas that you were governing. Those things were important. But those things were important only for the early Muslims, because you will find that we must remember that we have to draw a line between Islam and Muslims, because Islam is a religion, it's institutionalized, it's contained in a book which has remained unchanging for so many years. It has not changed at all. So the Quran in itself is complete. So, and it's unchanging. So, and even if you leave aside the interpretations of the Quran, even if you just read the Quran plain, in itself, it will give you a huge lot of things, which a lifetime is less to follow, really. So, you find that when these guys, when the Turks converted, they had some of the ideals they picked up, because now these are ideals, so they are also gunning for centralization. So when they come here, they will start a process of, bringing more lands in and posting their own officers in various places. Now, the officers who are posted in the various places, they are known as the iqtadars, okay, people who got iqta. Now, ikhta is basically an Arabic word. Okay. Now, if I rewind back, and if we go back to the Mahajanpad period, then you will find that the local power potentates, who are known as the Samans in some cases, or / the Zamindars as we know them later on, right? Or who are known as the Kalantaran. Agar hum ancient period ki baat karen, so they were known as the Kalantarans. So the Kalantaran meant the great ones, the powerful ones, right? So those are the guys who will later turn into Zamindars. So now what happens is that when you have the Turks who come here, they are going to they'll have their own officers posted everywhere, and they'll divide all the lands that they control into small units, which are known as the ikhtas, and you have iqtidars ruling over all these places, right? Now, the thing is that, and in this context, let me tell you a very interesting anecdote. Anecdote bhi nahi hai, balki it's actually a historical record, which is reported by a historian called Minhajus Siraj Juzjani in a book called Tabqat-e-Nasiri. Tabqat-e-Nasiri is one of the core fundamental original sources for the history of the Sultanate of Delhi. And the book derives its name, Tabqat-e-Nasiri, from its dedication to a ruler who was Nasiruddin Qubacha, who was ruling in the northwest, who was one of the governors of Muizzuddin Muhammad Sam Muhammad Ghori. The book says that when Iltutmish, who comes after Qutbuddin Aibak, so when Iltutmish became the Sultan of Delhi, because it's actually Iltutmish who will be ruling from Delhi. Aibak was most of the time in Lahore. Lahore was his capital. It wasn't Delhi. So it's Iltutmish who's going to effectively make Delhi his capital. So it says that a number of the ulema is the term which is used for scholars, right? And typically ulema will be used in the medieval period for, it's a collective for alim. Alim means someone who's a scholar, and uska plural is ulema. So a lot of the ulema came to Iltutmish, and they said that, see, now you've become so powerful and you've got so much of money, you convert all the people of Hindustan to Islam. You see, because you are in a position to do that. And Iltutmish, of course, knew that this is not possible, this is not happening, and neither was he interested in doing it. So he had a very smart wazir whose name was Nizamul Mulk Junaidi. And these are all historical figures. I mean, there's no story in this. So Nizamul Mulk Junaidi immediately said to the ulama that, see, our numbers are like a pinch of salt in a plate full of food. And therefore, what you are demanding is not possible. It's not possible because we are like a pinch of salt in food. And maybe we will think about it at some later date. That's what he said. Okay. Now, if we just again rewind a little back, then you will have a background of why a ruling class, somebody from the ruling class will have a take like this. We go further, and if you come to the area of Sindh, now Sindh had been occupied by an Arab, a man whose name was Abdul Qasim. And in Sindh, there was a social group. We know them very well now, and they have really done well for themselves, the Jats. The Jats were, I was telling you that when you have, this plantation starts in the Neolithic period, there is a huge mass of laborers who are exploited. And in that list of, laborers who are exploited, you will have names. So the names are what? The names are Chamar, Kolis, Dhanuks, Bhangis, also Jats. So the Jats were in Sindh, and there is a source which comes from Sindh of the 10th century, which is known as the Chachnama. The Chachnama was an Arab source, which was later translated into Persian. And the author of this work is Ali Kufi. So Ali Kufi writes that Mahmud was informed that there is a group of people in Sindh, which you are ruling now, who are discriminated against socially. And they have, there's something which is tied to their feet so that whenever they enter in an area, everyone gets to know that they are coming and the whole road is clean. And, it's believed that if they touch somebody, then you'll get polluted. So should we do something about it? So Qasim said, no, we don't have to do anything about it. We don't need to do anything about it. And it is expressly written in the Chachnama that he said that the only thing that I'm concerned about is getting the taxes from these lands. I have no interest in interfering in the local practices of the people here. Khatam, that's it. So they are not interested in interfering in the core practices of the people here. Having said that, when you come down to Iltutmish, you'll find that the very same thing is being repeated, because he clearly states that I have nothing to do with the religion of the local people. That's one thing. The other thing is that if you read, say, for example, any of the texts which relate to the early sultans, if you read Tajul Masir, which is of Hasan Nizami, which tells us about this man, Qutbuddin Aibak, or if you read Minhajul Siraj, Tabqat Nasiri, like I was just telling you, you clearly find that there are two things which are happening. The authors of these texts, they try to project their heroes as people who've come here to profess Islam, because that they think is something which is meritorious. I mean, that is something that they would just write, but it doesn't mean that that is really happening. That is something that they think that the ideal ruler should have been. That is their, that is their idea of an ideal ruler, which in itself is an ideal. So they use that and they project the rulers like that, which is not true. Okay. Now let me tell you one more thing. You must have heard about this man called that famous ruler of Ghazni, Mahmud of Ghazni. Mahmud of Ghazni is infamous for his approximately 30 raids on Hindustan, right? 17 of them are very prominent. Mahmud of Ghazni is known to have taken away the doors of the temple of Somnath from here to Ghazni, and he had them placed inside his palace. Okay, so if you read about the history of Mahmud of Ghazni, coming from a book which was written recently by Professor Romila Thapar, if you're familiar with her name, the title of this book is Somnath. And if you read about Mahmud of Ghazni in Romila Thapar's discourse, you find that Mahmud of Ghazni was somebody who was like a poster boy for the Sunni Khilafat of Baghdad. So he was the poster boy of the Sunni Khilafat of Baghdad. And you know that there was a divide between the Muslims themselves, between the Shia and the Sunni camps. And at that point in time, this divide was quite intense. So the Sunnis were projecting and they were promoting Mahmud of Ghazni as, a great, powerful Sunni ruler. And he was being backed by Baghdad. That's one thing. And when you read some of these, one of the commonplace sources, they'll say that Mahmud of Ghazni came to Hindustan as a raider because he wanted to spread Islam here. And his own historians also write that he wanted to promote Islam here. But did he do anything to promote Islam here? No, he didn't. Or do you think that he was himself an example to be followed by Muslims? Not at all. Why? Why is he not an example to be followed by any of the Muslims? Mahmud of Ghazni was utterly greedy for money, utterly greedy for power, utterly greedy for position, utterly greedy for appreciation by people around him. Is this what Islam professes? No, it doesn't. It doesn't profess any of this. If you read about Ghazni, from a source, which is again, this is the source that I'm going to cite before you is written itself by a mullah, which is Abdul Qadir Badayuni. Abdul Qadir Badayuni was a contemporary of Akbar, and he was known to be orthodox. So if you're thinking that Mahmud of Ghazni was the hero of the orthodox Muslims, then you please listen to what Abdul Qadir Badayuni writes about him. He says that when Mahmud of Ghazni was dying, he was so bothered that all his treasures and his money is going to be left behind. And therefore, he was bedridden on the bed. And he asked his people to bring out all his money and his treasures into his bedroom and spread it all around him so that he could see it. And Mahmud of Ghazni and Muntakhabut Tawari, this text is Muntakhabut Tawari of Abdul Qadir Badayuni, written in the 17th century, he's a contemporary of Akbar. He says that till the last breath, Ghazni did not give a penny out of that to anybody. He didn't give a penny out of that to anybody. Okay, so that is Ghazni for you. Ghazni, if you read Romila Thapar again, she says that he imprisoned people from here and he sold them as slaves to various places, right? So is that permitted? Was slavery permitted in Islam? Was the Prophet of Islam saying that yes, you can make slaves and you can sell them in the market? No. Then how does Ghazni become a professor of Islam? Not at all. He wasn't. And I can go on into it, but I don't think we'll have that much of time. So right, so we go to how did the Turks impact the culture here? So, it's not about religion, but what are the other things which just happen? Say, for example, food. Food is something which is, integral to cultural practices. So it is the Turks who brought with them the samosa. Now, samosa, is a very, very popular food in the Indian scenario. And but it was brought by the Turkish, by the Turks who came with Muizzuddin Muhammad Sam, and then you have Iltutmish and others who come here. So samosa, when they used to eat it, when you get from the sources of the Sultanate, they used to have samosas filled with keema, which is minced meat. So that was their samosa, and believe me, they used to have at least 5 or 6 samosas before they ate their meal. So I think that's, like some crazy kind of a diet, because I don't think we can eat anything after eating 2 samosas. We'll not be able to eat. But because they used to have such a hard life, I mean, they used to kind of do so much of horse riding and fighting and all of that. So it was like a starter for them, the samosa. The other thing which the Turks brought with them was halwa. Halwa was, their favorite. If you look at the indigenous Hindustani sweets from the ancient Indian period, most of the sweets which are indigenously Indian are milk-based, which are khoa-based. So you would have kheer. Kheer you will hear from all the ancient sources, rice with milk, with sugar, that's there. So kheer is there, khoa is there, barfi is there, and everything which is milk-based is all local, completely local, deep roots in the ancient Indian civilization. Halwa of gajar, halwa of all kinds of dals, halwa of, everything that you can't eat, otherwise you put ghee and chini in it and you bhunofy it and it becomes halwa and you eat it. That is Turkish. Then the other thing that they made very popular is sharbat. Because they came from colder climes, तो उनको यहाँ पे बहुत गर्मी लगती थी, तो शरबत will become very popular. और जो शरबत के accounts हैं, उसमें let me quote 2 very interesting accounts. एक तो Ibn Battuta, the Moroccan traveler who would come in the period of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So he writes, that if you had to meet Muhammad bin Tughlaq, then you had to go to that fort. If you are familiar with Delhi, you have the Tughlaqabad fort, and उसके पास में इन्होंने एक और fort बनाया था, बल्कि 2, which was the Adilabad, और फिर उन्होंने वो पूरे को enclose करा था, which is known as the Jahanpana. तो जब मोहम्मद बिन तुगलक से कोई मिलने जाता था, so there was a layer of security that you had to cross. There were a layer of chambers where you would be checked, and only then you get an entry. And then he says that when you were in the last waiting chamber before meeting the Sultan, then you were seated comfortably, and there'll be people who will be serving you all kinds of sharbats. That is one account that we get. Very interesting. And he says those are really delicious sharbats. The other account that we get is from Tarikh-e-Firoz Shahi, which is again an account which is a contemporary of Muhammad bin Tughlaq and the rulers after Firoz Shah Tughlaq, in which it says that when Alauddin Khilji, if you're familiar with Alauddin Khilji, when Alauddin Khilji was a usurper, he had killed his uncle and he had usurped the throne. And he had done that in Allahabad. If you're familiar with Hindustan, then which is the Prayagraj. So he had killed his uncle around the area of Prayagraj, and the capital was in Delhi. So it states that when he was coming to Delhi, the whole route, in the whole route, there were, tents which had been put up in which sharbat was being distributed to the villagers who had come out to see that who's the new sultan that we are going to get. And while he was traveling, and not only the sharbat, actually, it also says that he had got light cannons made, which are known as the manjneek. And manjneek se ye cannon hai, top hai, but light top, not with the impact which will kill somebody. तो वो मंजनीक में से सोने और चांदी के सिक्के उड़ाते हुए आ रहे थे, Alauddin Khilji, right? So now again, I mean, we are kind of, reiterating the point that money is a big deal. Okay. So, right, we are talking about dishes. So, sharbat bhi jo hai, wo Turkish innovation. और उसके बाद फिर क्या होता है, हम लोग देखते हैं कि बाबर जब हिंदुस्तान में आते हैं, तो बाबर कहते हैं कि हमें जो है वो यहाँ का खाने का हमें देखना है कि हिंदुस्तान में क्या क्या खाना अच्छा होता है. और बाबर पूरी जिंदगी he had been, basically roaming around from one place to the other most of his youth, except for the last 15 years before 1526, when he was the ruler of Kabul. Let me tell you one instance about Babar and how fond he was about food, and how much of detail he remembered things about food. He was once visiting one of his cousins whose name was Badi-uz-Zama. So Badi-uz-Zama had thrown a party in which a roasted geese was made. Okay? A roasted geese is like a murg musallam, which was, whole. And Babar didn't know how to cut the geese, because, there is a way in which you can cut it. Because अगर आपने देखा हो, ये जो कसाई होते हैं, when they chop meat, they will chop it each time at the same conjunction of bones, because that's how it's supposed to be chopped. So he didn't know how to cut the geese neatly, so he didn't have it. So his cousin asked that, why are you not having this? He said, I don't know how to cut it. So his cousin was very good at this, at table manners. So he cut Babar's geese also. And then Babar writes in the Babarnama that I noticed that my cousin Badi-uz-Zama is very good at table manners, and he knew exactly how to cut the geese. And that day I realized that someone who's so sophisticated in his eating etiquettes is not someone who will be able to fight a battle with me. Someone who will be not in the war field, because in the war field you have to be really tough. And if you hear about, when Babar used to move, in wars, speed is a very important factor, the coordination of speed and time, and how you outdo your opponents by way of being more speedy. So sometimes they had no time to cook, so they would just, put raw meat in the stirrup, not in the stirrup, but in the zine of the horse. So between the seat and the horse, raw piece of meat, long thin piece, and then they would just ride on. And that is how it used to become soft, and then they would just eat it. Anyways, when Babar came here, he said, I want to see what is the kind of food that these guys had. So he retained some of the cooks of Ibrahim Lodi, whom he had defeated in the Battle of Panipat. And it so happened that one of the cooks poisoned him. And it is stated, Babar himself states, that the poison was bought from Etawah. The poison was brought from Etawah. Etawah is a small town in UP. And then he says that luckily that man had not mixed the poison in the gravy, but he had only sprinkled it on top of my meat. And that is how he says that the moment I had the first morsel, I started vomiting. And then eventually he was saved, but he was very angry about this. But what I wanted to tell you, that food therefore was, it is an important thing as far as our lived culture is concerned. It's an important thing. Let me give you another example. So Babar is someone who's trying to, familiarize himself with what the Indian food is like. And when we come to Humayun, by that time, the Mughals have become so kind of, identified with Hindustan, that Humayun is ousted out from here, and he goes to Persia, and he takes asylum with the Shah of Persia. And the Shah of Persia eventually helps Humayun in coming back to Hindustan and regaining his lost empire in 1555. So when the Shah came to drop Humayun till Kabul, he asked Humayun that before we part, you must treat me to, the best of the Hindustani dishes, because I have not had Hindustani dishes. And the two Hindustani dishes, a lot of things were made, and the two indigenous Hindustani dishes, which the Shah of Iran, which was Shah Tehmasp, who is known for his grandeur and also his anger, the two things that he really loved were matar pulao. We are all familiar with matar pulao. And the other thing was masoor ki dal, which is dry masoor dal, was what he really liked. So that is something that we get on record. Then, right, so we were talking about food. Now, the other thing which is, again, indigenous completely to Hindustan, but also continuing right through, no matter your, Turks come or Mughals come or whoever comes, which is pan, which is beetle. Excuse me, can you please put off your mic?
Where is yours? I think.
Okay.
Where, please stop your mic.
Yeah. Right. So the other thing is pan, which is in the Sanskrit works, it's known as tambul, right? Tambul is, like if you look at say for example, the Bhagavad Puran. The Bhagavad Puran is a Bhakti movement document. It's a whole text from the 8th century AD. And it has to do with, the rise of Vaishnavism and the worship of Sri Krishna and Radha. So in the imagery that you find there, you will find that Sri Krishna and also Sri Radha, both of them eat tambul, pan. And they also exchange pan with each other. Now, as this is in the ancient period, even in Vatsyayan, and of some of the really ancient texts, you will find the mention of pan. So it is been always there. The other thing that we find is that in the Turkey, when the Turks come here, you find that pan becomes an identifier of trust. Say, for example, if Behzad gives me a pan, and if I eat it, that means I trust him. Because otherwise, there is always a possibility that he could have poisoned me. So if I don't trust Behzad, I'm not going to eat the pan that he gives me. So it was an identifier. Now, let me give you one interesting example in this case. It comes from the Tarikh-e-Firoz Shahi of a man called Shams-e-Siraj Afif. Okay. So Shams-e-Siraj Afif is also a contemporary historian who's writing in the medieval period. And this comes about this man called Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Okay. Firoz Shah Tughlaq is, Muhammad bin Tughlaq's cousin and his successor. Now, a little background check on Firoz Shah Tughlaq, which also tells you about how there is inter-religious and intercultural interaction which is happening. Firoz Shah Tughlaq's uncle, which is Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, father of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, the builder of the Tughlaqabad fort in Delhi, a huge, rich man. So Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq had a younger brother whose name was Rajab. Now Rajab fell in love with a Bhatti princess, and the Bhattis were Rajputs, non-Muslims. And Rajab told his elder brother, see, I'm helplessly in love with this princess, and if I don't get married to her, I'll die. So a wedding proposal was immediately sent. And the Bhatti Rajputs, they took a tough stand. They said that, well, if he dies, we don't care. And even if we have to die, that's also okay. But we are not marrying our daughter to a Muslim. So Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, who loved his younger brother a lot, he said that fine, then we are going to come and we'll have a battle, we'll fight it out. And the princess said that no, we are not going to fight it out, I will marry him. And so this Rajput princess decides to marry Rajab. The marriage takes place and Rajab dies after a couple of months, but she's expecting his child. And this child is Firoz Shah Tughlaq. So Firoz Shah Tughlaq's mother and all of his Nanihal, they're all non-Muslim Rajputs. Okay. Now it so happened that you have Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq dies, Muhammad bin Tughlaq comes to power, And then Muhammad bin Tughlaq also dies in an accident. And then all of that empire comes to Firoz Shah Tughlaq, who is not from the same bloodline, because he is, a cousin of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Muhammad bin Tughlaq's real sister thought that her son has more right over the empire than Firoz Shah. And she decided to poison him. So he used to go to meet her every Friday. Every Friday there used to be a lunch, and after the lunch she would give him a pan, and he would eat that pan. And that day also the same thing happened. And since it used to be a Friday, all the Muslim soldiers used to be on leave because of the Friday prayers. So on the Fridays, the personal security of the Sultan was taken care of by the Bhatti Rajputs of his Nanihal, who were all non-Muslims, because all the Muslim soldiery was on leave on Fridays. And they thought that this will be, a good occasion to kill him, because, and then we can also always pin it on the non-Muslims that, they have taken this old revenge and they've killed this fellow. But the son of Firoz Shah Tughlaq's sister, he was standing behind his mother. So when his mother offered the pan to Firoz Shah, her son from behind did like this. No, he did like this. Don't eat. So he just said that I've just remembered some work and I'm going. And when murders like this were planned, there was always a cue. So if the cue doesn't happen, the attack will not happen. And the cue was this, that he's going to eat the pan. The moment he eats the pan, his head was to be chopped off. So he didn't eat the pan, head is not chopped off. And the Bhatti Rajputs, they play on their life to save him, and he is taken back to safety. So pan became a marker of, and then when you read about Akbar's period, you have letters which are coming from Faizi, who takes Akbar's correspondence to various people, and they all say, and he writes back, that Fala ruler has accepted pan from me, which means that he has accepted the allegiance that he will now owe to the Mughal Badshah, and that he trusts the Mughal Badshah, and so on and so forth. So you have this whole thing. Then the other thing which is also indigenous is opium. It was indigenous. It was always, a part of, toxic drinks. And amongst this, one thing which was very popular was toddy, which is, tadi. And tadi, we find, is, if you read, again, the Bhagavad Puran, and if you read things about Sri Krishna, then Sri Krishna's brother in the Mathura Vrindavan region, whose name is Balram. Balram was supposed to be an addict of tadi in the ancient, in the ancient religious texts. So then you find, and if you go down to the British period, you would find that they are still, tadi is a very popular drink. And some of the European travelers who come here in the, Mughal period, late Mughal period, they say that water is not clean everywhere. So we have tadi instead of water, because it is distilled. So it's cleaner than the water that we get to eat. Let me just tell you quickly one instance that how the cultural difference worked over a period in time. You find that Akbar, when he becomes the ruler, but let me begin with Humayun quickly. Humayun advised the women of his family to try the kind of clothes that the local women wear, okay? And the local women here used to actually wear what we now know as the sari. So there is a top, and the stomach is uncovered, and then you have a wrap around. That is what Babar describes that most of the people here wear. And Humayun is advising his women to try out, because this is very hot. So maybe this design works better for this place. That is interesting, because he's ready to accept change. That is there. And the other thing that he also says, two things that he retains. One is the Jharoka Darshan, which was an ancient indigenous practice where the Maharaj used to sit in his balcony and, give a darshan to people. and also Tuladan. As the name also says, Tuladan was weighing of the emperor or the ruler against precious items, and then those items were distributed. In the ancient period, they were distributed typically to the Brahmins, but as time passes, you will find that they are distributed sometimes to the poor in general. In the reign of Jahangir, you get to know that the Tuladan money is being given to widow women. He writes it in the Tuzuke-Jahangiri's autobiography that this year we have decided that we are going to give the money to widow women. So, but the practice is indigenous and it is continued right through, it's right through. If you think about, and Muhammad bin Tughlaq is somebody who's known to have played holy with his subjects. He was very liberal. He encouraged a lot of foreigners in the service. From Muhammad bin Tughlaq's period, we have an account which comes from an Arab traveler whose book is called the Masalikul Absar fi Mamalikul Amsar. The Masalikul Absar fi Mamalikul Amsar is a huge text with 40 volumes. And in these volumes, there are almost 8 chapters which deal with India. And they tell about Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So it's interesting. And what are the strange things that these guys tell? Let me just tell you a little bit about how, there is a difference between the Arab travelers, how the Arab travelers are being treated here and how the local merchants are being treated here. This man, his name is Shahabuddin al-Umri, the author of this book, and this is a 14th century text. So he says that there are too many snakes in India. And you know that India has actually a lot of snakes, tropical, humid place, a lot of jungles. So he says that there are too many snakes here. And he says that there are some snakes which, there is one huge snake which doesn't slither on its own. So it rides on other snakes. That is something that he writes, which is very interesting. The other thing that he says that there is another snake whose eyes are poisonous. Typically like what you saw in the Harry Potter, that if you looked in the eye of the bacillus, you would die. So you didn't have to look into the eye of the bacillus. That is something which Shahabuddin al-Umri records in the 14th century. But what is interesting is that he says that if an Arab is bitten by a snake, then the local ojhas, the local, the local healers, they take more charge from the foreigners than from their Indian patients. So that is an interesting thing, because in 14th century also you find that there is a different rate for the foreigners and there is a different rate for the indigenous Hindustanis. Then, of course, let me tell you that Akbar was very sensitive to, to intercultural, interfaith dialogue. And therefore, he took a number of steps. Amongst that, one of the famous one is that he banned cow slaughter. He said that no cows are to be slaughtered at all in his empire. And there are people who note it. Abdul Qadir Badayani writes that he did so because he was sensitive to the beliefs of his subjects, the majority of his subjects. And he also writes that he was very interested in the in understanding his non-Muslim subjects. That is why he had what is known as the Maktab Khana project. The Maktab Khana project was a process of translation of Sanskrit books into Persian so that the ruling class may be able to understand the mindset of the local people. And the texts which were translated in the Maktab Khana are the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the Harivansh Puran, the Panchtantra, the Nilkant Shastri's book on mathematics, that was Nal Damayanti. So all these were translated into Persian. And let me tell you one interesting anecdote which comes from a foreign traveler who's traveling in Akbar's period, which is Sebastian Manrique, who was a Portuguese traveler. And Manrique writes, Behzad, I'll stop after this one, right? So Manrique writes that he was traveling through Gujarat, okay? So one thing that he writes is that the people here are so rich. One thing, let me also tell you, that all the foreign travelers write about Indians, that they love gold. They love gold. Dunya mein sone ka daam kitna bhi chala jaye, Hindustani sona kharidna abhi bhi nahi chhodte. और हम तब की बात कर रहे हैं. I'm talking about, the medieval Indian period. And he says the interesting thing is that some of these villagers will have nothing to eat, but they will still buy gold. And what do they do with the gold? He said that they hoard it. They have this love for gold. So they will just hoard it. You may not even see them wearing it, but they have it. The other thing that these guys write is that the rich people have enough money to even clothe their animals. And he writes that in Gujarat, I have seen, this is from the 16th century, he says that, balki 17th century, because he's writing in 1604 AD, just 1 year before Akbar dies. So he says that the cows here wear coat, and all their coats are properly stitched to their size, and they also have buttons in them. They're all very nicely, done. Now, these guys were traveling through Gujarat, and he says that there was one Christian man and one Muslim man. And then he writes that although the Christian and the Muslim, both these fellows, they didn't like each other for their respective faith, but both of them decided that they are going to kill a peacock and eat it. Now, the interesting thing is that the third concerned party, which is, the majority of the people here, were the non-Muslims who actually worshipped the peacock in this region. So these two guys who otherwise hated each other, they decided that we'll kill the peacock and we'll eat it. And they did that. And this Manri fellow writes that I was still familiar with Hindustan. So I knew that you can't pull off stuff like this here. But he says that I was asleep. And he says that when I got up and I heard that commotion inside our tent and I got up, I said, oh God, what have you done? So we hid the body of the peacocks. And he writes that in the night when everyone was asleep, then we cleaned them and we ate them. And then we dug a hole and we buried all the feathers and the bones. And agle din, they were supposed to leave that town and go to another town. He said that we had hardly left that somebody came to clean the tent. And some tiny feathers were lying here and there. And then these guys guessed that two of the big moors are missing. So these fellows must have eaten them. And then he writes, that these people, they followed us and they caught hold of us. And they had bought, he writes that they had brought bows and arrows and lances. The villagers had brought bows and arrows and lances to kill us. So he says that we fired a gunshot. Now this is, 17th century AD. So he says that we fired a gunshot, and he says that because of the sound of the gunshot, our guide who was standing on our side, he ran to the other side. And this guide was Indian. So he was so scared that he ran to the other side, and then he fainted there. And when he fainted there, then all these gaonwalas, they ran away. And he says that we managed to reach the next town. He says that in the next town, we lodged into a guest house and we were quite happy that, our skin has been saved. But their guide took money from them for guiding them up till this new town. And then he went to the local governor and he reported that these foreigners have killed 2 peacocks. And so the police came and it arrested them. And then they found out what is the punishment for killing a peacock in the Mughal territory. This was Mughal territory. And he writes that in the territory of Akbar, you are not allowed to kill any animal or bird which is considered to be sacred by the Hindus. So he says that the punishment for this was whip and amputation of the hand. And he says that those 2 guys who had actually killed, one of them a Muslim and one a Christian, they were the fellows who were going to be, perhaps their hands would have been amputated. So he said that we were really scared and we approached the governor and we begged for his forgiveness. So the governor very generously said that, okay, we are not going to ampute their hand, but we'll just cut all the fingers. Then he says that this didn't help us much. We were still very worried. And then finally, through somebody, they approached the wife of the governor. They bribed her with whatever money they had. And then eventually they were able to save themselves from, this fate. So you find that there's a lot of concern, and there is, in Akbar at least, there's a lot of concern. In fact, even in the later of the Mughals, you will find that there is an understanding of the cultural system of the majority of their population. And they make a very special effort to respect and not to violate that. But we must also remember that Jahangir's mother was a Rajput princess. So he was half Rajput in any case. Shah Jahan's mother was a Rajput princess. He was also half more than half. He was 3/4 Rajput because his father was anyways half Rajput. So you find that, of course, they were very sensitive to the local practices and the local, understanding of various things. So I think I'll stop here. I can speak much more because I had a lot many things to say, but let's first discuss. Or maybe, Behzad, there was a little thing that I wanted to speak about witchcraft. If you allow me, I will. Otherwise, we'll just keep it for later.
Yes, ma'am, of course. And I'm sure more questions will come from our participants. So, you can also add whatever you wanted to in your presentation with a question. So,
okay,
you just continue
so then I was thinking, of this...
and maybe.
Right. Right. Thank you. Thank you. So now, this idea of witchcraft, say for an example, you would find that witchcraft is something which was, which we get to hear of from the Panchtantra. A number of stories in the Panchtantra will talk about witches. Like, I'll give you one example. And now the other interesting part is when we talk about witchcraft in the modern context. And like you saw recently, when you have this girl who was being trailed by the media, Riya Chakrabarti, it kept running in the strips that this is a witch hunt. A witch hunt is happening. So if you look at the history of witch hunt, it's really ancient. And this works at two levels. One is that you say that somebody is really a witch. Somebody is a born witch. The other is that a person is possessed by a witch. So there's this idea whether you were born evil or you are possessed by an evil spirit. These are two different things. Okay. And in this, what you find is that till the time you have this belief which is operating, that you can be possessed by an evil spirit, there is a chance that people will still leave you alive because they'll try to get rid of the evil spirit from your body and then say that, well, you have been purified by either some pandit or some mullah or some priest, or somebody has purified you because they have driven out that evil. But if the belief is this, that no one can be possessed, you are born evil, you are an incarnation of the Satan, then it becomes very difficult. Like I was telling you, in the Panchtantra, there is a narrative in which there is this, there's a woman who has a very evil mother-in-law. So she runs away from her house because of this atrocities of her mom-in-law, and she tries to go to her father's house. In the middle of her journey, she finds a tree in a jungle. It's a huge hollow tree. So she sits inside that hollow. Now, while she sits inside that hollow, that tree was owned by two witches. So they, in the middle of the night, they flew with the tree to an island which was full of golden sand which was gold particles. So this woman got down there. Her name is Saumitri. So Saumitri got down there and she collected a lot of gold particles full in her sari. And then she sat in the hollow again. And these witches brought the tree back to the same jungle. She got out from the hollow and she went with all that money to her mother-in-law. And she said, see, Amma, now I've brought so much of money. At least now I'll have some respect in the house. So you let me come back and I'm ready to stay, and so on. Now, mother-in-law gave her a firing and she said that you brought such little gold. If I would have gone with those witches, I would have brought a lot more. So the mother-in-law now sat in the tree. But the story portrays the character of the mother-in-law as someone who's extremely greedy, ill-tempered, short-tempered. So that day, these witches decided that they'll not go to that golden island, but they'll go to an island which is full of crabs because they wanted to have crabs that day. So this woman from inside the hollow, she abused the two witches and she said that you must go to the golden beach. And the witches were so annoyed and angry that someone has come to know of their secret that they dropped her right there and she's dead. So one is the real witches and other is the mother-in-law who's like the witch. Then you find that this has this, this cultural belief of witches has a international thread. Because if you look at Shakespeare's Macbeth, if you're familiar with English literature, then in Macbeth you have three witches who are guiding Macbeth. And they make a soup. And in that soup, what are the ingredients that they put? They put a Turk's nose, matlab ek Turk ki naak kati hui, and Uzbek's lips, the finger of a dead child, the tail of a lizard, the tongue of a snake, and stuff like that, so on and so forth. So Macbeth has a very graphic description of all of this kind of the witches use these kind of ingredients, and how they then misguide Macbeth and how he is killed. Now, when we come to the Indian context, you would find that in the medieval times, you will find that there are tales of witches in various places. Like, for example, there is a source which comes from Assam, which is known as the Tarikh-e-Ibriya. The Tarikh-e-Ibriya, as the name suggests, Ibrat, it's coming from the word Ibrat. Ibrat means a lesson. So it's saying the history of lessons. And the author says that you must never go to Assam, because if you go there, there's so much of black magic and witchcraft there that you will never come back alive. This man is writing in the 16th century, 1-6. And then, he'll tell a lot of things, that how people do black magic there and so on and so forth. So you find that there is a thread of this kind of a belief system, which is cross-cultural, okay, which is not restricted to one type of culture. And the continuity of some of these things is still there. Like, say, for example, in the recent past, if you look at the data, there are, at least thousands of women who are killed every year in the name of witchcraft. There are laws which have been made against witchcraft in India, and various states have their own laws. Jharkhand has its own laws, Bihar has, Assam has, Rajasthan has, because these places have a lot of cases, a lot of cases where women are killed because of witchcraft. So you find that most of the cases, if you try to analyze them, they have to do with some or the other kind of an economic issue. If there are cases of land grabbing, where there is a woman who has a lot of land which she inherited, she is killed, and in the name of being a witch, and then her land is grabbed by her relatives. And most of the cases, you will find that the people who say that such and such a person is a witch are known to her. So generally, it is not strangers who come and point fingers, but it's people who are well known. So that is one issue. And say, for example, we talk about this whole idea of, rights of women. Like, I'll give you an example. The right to women to drive movement is associated with Saudi Arabia. Okay. And the Women to Drive movement was a recent development, 2011-12, when there was an increased, kind of demand of Arabian women to drive. And eventually they were granted the right to drive. And when Prince Mohammed bin Salman was asked to comment on it, because Mohammed bin Salman is, the hip and happening face of the new ruling gen in Saudi Arabia. So he said that we did not give this right to the women here because it was not a part of our culture. He did not say that this was not a part of our religion, because Islam per se gives a lot of rights and a lot of equality to women, which the Muslim culture as it has developed in various places may or may not give. So even a place which is, in Saudi Arabia is the place of the Prophet, which has been people who have a history of actually witnessing the revolution of Islam, which we have not witnessed but read about. So those guys were denying women of, the right to drive. So the right to drive movement is a signifier of how, gender-based discrimination also is a cultural thing, and it also cuts across cultures. And like, I'll give you another example, that Akbar, if you think of, in the Indian context, we had the Devdasi system, right? And in the Devdasi system, a lot of women were turned into prostitution. If you look at the history of zamindari rights, you find that the zamindars always exploited women of the villages. If you think of how Akbar intervenes into this cultural practice, not exactly into the Devdasis, but into the practice of prostitution in general, you find that he established a locality which was known as Shaitanpura. and all the prostitutes were supposed to stay in the Shaitanpura only. And there was an officer who was appointed in Shaitanpura to ensure the safety and security of all the prostitutes there. If somebody wanted to take a prostitute out of Shaitanpura for a night or two, he was supposed to register his own address, his designation, also where he was taking the girl and when was she likely to come back. So that all that had to be registered so that nobody vanished with any of the girls from there. Then Akbar used to regularly interview some of the popular prostitutes and ask them whether any of his officials were misusing them. Misusing as in using them but not paying them because of the authority that they had. So he was trying to protect the rights of the prostitutes in his dominion. That's one thing. The other thing that we also get to know from Akbar's period is, one is affair, inter-community affair between a Hindu girl and a Muslim man. So that is an account that we get from his reign. Then we get to know of other love stories, in which you have a Sheikh ji, basically someone, Sheikh, the title is attached to people who are ulama, people who are, basically learned and educated. So there was this young Sheikh who'd fallen in love with a singing girl from Agra. And he wanted to marry her. And the Sheikh's family was, very much against it. So they approached Akbar and they said that, Basha Salamat, you please get her married to somebody. Otherwise, this boy from our family is going to marry her. So Akbar got her married to somebody. And this noble, and this girl ran away from her husband. And then both the Sheikh and this girl, they were on the run. So Akbar said that you bring them to my court and I will talk to them and I'll see if they're truly in love with each other, I'll have them married. So they were brought and Akbar was ready to get them married, but the Sheikh's family said that will not accept her ever. So this Sheikh committed suicide. And when the Sheikh committed suicide, then the case again came to Akbar's court because a large party of the ulama said that now we are not going to hold his namaz-e-janaza because he's committed suicide and it's not allowed. And Akbar was of the opinion, there was one section in the court which was of the opinion, including the Sheikh's family. They said that since he's died for love, therefore he should be counted as a shaheed. And the namaz-e-janaza should be, done as per proper ritual. And then Akbar had to take a call on this, and he took a call that the namaz-e-janaza was going to be offered. So in many things you find, that there are cultural exchanges, there are readjustments, there are places where people are trying to understand each other and reach a via media. And I think that is very important because, see, we must understand that no one is, free of flaws. All of us are free. All of us are, full of one flaw or the other. So therefore, acceptance and being ready to learn, being ready to exchange, I think those are very important things. And there are a lot of examples in history from where you can learn why you should do it and how it should be done and why it is essential. Because, whole lives have been destroyed, people have been destroyed by being rigid. So I think it's important that we learn that we have to communicate with others and we have to be open to readjustments, if not for anyone else's sake, then for our own sake, certainly. So I think I'll stop here, Behzad, so that we can have a discussion.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Now the floor is open for questions. Anybody who wants to ask a question, please unmute yourself and ask.
Can I ask, Behzad sir? Can I just ask?
Please go ahead.
Ma'am Farhat Nasreen, it was a pleasure to listen to you. I don't know, I never looked at the clock. Now I'm looking at the clock, though I have done right.
Thank you so much, Sabia. Thank
you. And I just want to tell you, I'll just take only 10 seconds to tell you. So interested I was in history that after I became an assistant professor in a college, I did my MA, the first one to do. After that, I did about 7 more masters. That's a different story I've done. masters in sociology and public administration and so many. But history still remains to be a very close to heart subject, because history is narrating life. And there are so many food items in India which all have got their sources from either Persia or like other things. And I don't know why are Mughals being always equaled with. Right now I don't want to name anybody, but a latest actress had said that, oh, Mumbai has become the territory of Babur. No, Babur was a very good man. He never did anything else in the world. And I stay in Maharashtra, and you'll be amazed to know that there are so many Maharashtrian cultures which have their base in, I would say, Persia. I will not even say Muslim. I will say to a geography. For example, if you look at Shivaji Maharaj, the churidar that he used to wear, his churidars used to have a 6-inch churis. And the achkan that he used to wear, the achkan is so being used by brocade, shiny, all those things, full hand, because he had to ride a horse, you understand. So churidar pajama gives you a lot of comfy level to ride a horse, and he used to have guerrilla warfare tactics, so he had to go in between the bushes and other things, so that dhoti would have been uncomfortable, so he resorted to churidar pajama. And Dadi used to save his skin from the utter heat. Maharashtra is pretty heaty. It's made of igneous rocks. So you have to understand, you have to have this dialogue. And do you know that any Maharashtrian wedding is not fulfilled unless the bride and the groom feed each other with a jalebi? Now, if you look at the history of jalebi, the jalebi comes from Iran. It comes from because in India, anything which is khamir, which is leftover, will never be used in the, because Hindu way of life is always eating fresh. Raat ki roti subah nahi khani, gaay ko khilani hai. It's like that, So how important is dialogue? How important is dialogue for us to understand that we are a part of centuries of culture which has influenced on us, and have to understand that we have to let go things, understand this cultural timeline that India is blessed to have. It is very true, half of the Mughals were half Rajputs, their mothers were Rajput. The whole Zanan Khana used to be ruled by Rajput princes. Like Jodhabai brought her I think Bhatiji, and then her Bhanji and her other people into the Mughal haram, so that they can also have a very lovely life. And nowhere in the world we find one single document documented where Akbar was against any Hindu tradition, But then, of course, this Aurangzeb did a lot of, but he was a bad man. He never spared his father. He never spared his sisters. Jahanara and Alamara both were a victim of his atrocities. So dialogue is very important. And I'll just stop by just telling an observation. So I'm a Muslim married to a non-Muslim, and I'm always been questioned by my own community and by the other community, but none of them believe me. They always have a question mark. You're in a dilemma. But then I have made my classroom very open, and I ask them that you can ask any question in the world that you want to ask about Islam, because I've studied a lot. So one day, one child of mine, I'm in a B.Ed college. I've been teaching there for 30 years. Okay. So I was telling, so she said that, tell me, why is it that Hindus are not allowed to do Hajj? So I said, beta, because Saudi Arabia is a monarchy. It's king's rule. So they have their own way of ruling. It's not democracy. It's not the people of Arab has said that don't Hindus will not bear. So it's king's rule, and kings have their own way of ruling. It's basically monastics, and they have made rule that non-Muslims will not come inside. They have not stopped any Hindu coming into Saudi Arabia, but not into the Kaaba Sharif. So she said, no, it's not like that. You will be amazed to know a child who has come to become a teacher and kind of mindset that she has. So she says, no, it's not like that. I said, why? Well, as soon as you get down in Saudi Arabia, there is a testing happening. I said, what testing happening? Well, no, they come with a plate of beef, and then you have to eat the beef. And if you eat the beef, then you are allowed inside the haram, inside Saudi Arabia. And if you don't eat the beef, then you have been sent back from the airport. I laughed to my throat. And I said, who poisons you? I said, have you ever heard of the incidents that happen in every year into Saudi Arabia, that tent mein aag lag gayi. So I said, do you ever try to understand tent mein aag lagi kaise? So she said, no, I never said. I said, isliye aag lagti hai because poor people who go to do Hajj, they make their own food. They make food on stoves. And the tent is made of cloth, so they don't understand that, and that's why tent mein aag lagti hai. Some people have to make, and I said, by that rule, APJ Abdul Kalam could have never been got to do a Hajj because he was a complete vegetarian. He 100% he was a vegetarian, and he went to do Hajj. And he came back. Nobody knew he took official permission of 1 month from press. When he was the president, then he went to do Hajj. So see, dialogue is so way. After that, that girl became my favorite. She's very close to me, ma'am. But as you are saying, historical, cultural dialogue is extremely important to create a mindset where peace would prevail. And thank you so much. May I join you many more times that you have your lectures? I would love to be in your class and learn, because this is mesmerizing. This is so very nice to know that dialogue is so important for people to live amicably and peacefully in a multicultural, multi-layered society. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Very true. Very true. Thank you so much, Sabia. This was, your comments were also very enlightening. Whatever you told was also so interesting and adding so much to the discourse. Thank you so much. And I hope we'll meet in future as well and be in touch. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I think Abul Kalam Azad, the question, he raised a hand.
Yes, sir. This is Abul Kalam Azad. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Please go ahead.
Sir, I am from Bangladesh. I have a question. I mean, let's say I'm very much impressed by listening Farhat Nasreen ma'am. She was really discussing very nicely. I mean, I don't know how she has memorized those names. I mean, so many names. So I have one question. Is I don't want to take much time. My question is.
Can't hear you.
Can't you hear me?
Azad.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you well. Azad, please repeat your question though.
Yes, my question is, I mean, let's say, I mean, Ma'am was discussing regarding so many rulers. I want to talk about 3 rulers. One of them is, let's say, Mahmud Ghaznavi. Another one is, let's say, Tipu Sultan. I mean, although she didn't talk about it, then Emperor Akbar. I mean, from different history, and they have, I mean, different historian look them in different perspective. According to some historian, they are hero. According to some historian, they are villain. I mean, let's say if I talk about Tipu Sultan, maybe some of the religion is there saying they have did bad thing for that reason, but for other religion, maybe they did, I mean, good thing for that religion. How we are going to, I mean, understand that? I mean. He was a really good ruler or a bad ruler. I mean, how are you going to differentiate it?
Okay. See, Azad, first thing is this, that it's very important to, be objective when you're studying history, because in history there are 2 things. One is objectivity and the other is subjectivity. So you have to be objective. That is, you have to disassociate yourself as a person from your subject, right? So if you're a particular religion, it doesn't mean that you have to prove that everyone who's from your religion was right. And that is the wrong mindset, actually. So you have to look at people very objectively and judge them by a parameter, which is a fair parameter not of your religion, but a parameter of social justice. That is the first thing. The other thing that I would like to point out to you is this, that all rulers, whether it is Akbar or Tipu Sultan or Mahmud Ghazni or say any of them, basically you see but the ground line is this, that they are all exploiting, they are all agencies of exploitation. Okay? So whether they are Muslim rulers or they are Hindu rulers or Christian rulers, whoever they are, if they use religion as a identifier, or if they're using the religion or the language of religion to get something, that just shows that they are misusing religion, because none of them are people who are working for religion. They're all working for themselves, including Akbar, all of them. So they have their personal agendas. Within those agendas, how much do they accommodate others, and how humane can they be within those agendas is what is, what kind of, differentiates them. Like Sabiha just now said that Aurangzeb was in any case not a very great man. I totally agree with her. I mean, whatever people say about Aurangzeb, Aurangzeb is someone whose personality is supposed to be very complex. And he was used by the British big time because they wanted to push back the timeline of Hindu-Muslim divide to Aurangzeb's period. They didn't want to say ki we have had a policy of divide and rule and we have divided the Hindus and Muslims of Hindustan after the revolt of 1857. They wanted to push the timeline back. So they further, added to Aurangzeb more of notoriety than what he had. He was notorious because he killed a lot of people. He was completely ruthless. No two opinions about it. But he was also used by the next set of rulers, that is the British. So we have to be very careful. And our perspective, how we look at people and things, that is the biggest thing. I'll give you one example. Once there were people who were traveling in a bus. Okay, there was a man who was traveling in a bus, and there was another man who came up onto the bus with two children. And the children were, running around here and there, tearing things, creating a ruckus. So this fellow felt very disturbed and he kept cursing them. And he thought that why doesn't their father give them a whack and ask them to sit quietly? I mean, they're creating so much of a nuisance. And finally, this man said that their mother just died and we've just buried her and we are coming back from the cemetery. So the moment he got to know that, his perspective towards the children changed. So, the perspective shift, there are many examples of this. Like there were two men who were sitting on a bench and both of them had the same kind of biscuit, right? And this fellow was eating his biscuit and the other fellow started eating from his, thela of biscuit. And the man number one thought that, look at this chap number two, he's so battamiz. Without asking me, he's eating from my biscuit. And eventually that fellow left, And then number one realized that uska apna biscuit ka packet was inside his bag. He had not even taken it out. So it was actually number two's biscuit which he was eating. So perspective change is a big thing. And I think what perspective we use to look at them is important. And we ourselves as teachers are powerful people, very, very powerful, because we influence minds. That is why you find that किताबें बैन हो जाती हैं because किताबें लोग कैसे सोचते हैं उसको बदलने का potential रखती हैं. And once you teach, like, when you teach people who become teachers or who will become whatever later in life, you're influencing their mind. So we have to be very careful when we talk.
Yes, ma'am. Now we have three people who want to ask a question. First, Vishal, then Niazi, and third, Mushtaqul Ahmed Sikandar. So Vishal first. Please go ahead, Vishal.
Ma'am, I'm Vishal and I'm from Jamia. I just did my graduation. Ma'am, it was a wonderful lecture by you and I have 3 questions and I will shoot them straight away. My first question is related to marketplaces. What was happening in the marketplaces, because marketplace is a wonderful place to have a dialogue, right? And my second question is related to the question class. We were talking about exploitation. You did not utter the word caste, and it almost felt like there is an eraser, like upon the word of the exploitation in the form of caste. So, ma'am, I would like you to comment upon that, because my next question is related to the same thing. Like there was a huge battle going on between the communities from different sections. You could see, like, there were Shram traditions, and there were Brahmanical traditions. Upayata was there, then there was Advaitas and all of that. So how the debates were going.
Vishal, your voice is breaking. Your third question is not coming through clearly. Your third question is not coming.
My third question is, I will just make it very clear, ma'am, how vernacular were challenging their exploitation because they could not challenge the Brahmanical traditions like Shramanics and the Lokayas, how they challenged it, how they initiated the dialogues like Lokayata with the Brahmanism, how they documented it in vernacular form. That's my question, third question.
Okay, so the first thing first that you spoke about the markets, right? You said that market is an interesting place where you can see interactions, right? Yeah, so markets, if you read a lot of the foreign travelers, they have written about the markets, and some of them write that it's very important that how do we dress up in the market. And some of them felt that if you dressed up in the local dress, then the chances are that you will not be fooled. You will be fooled lesser if you are dressed in something which the locals wear. So they actually write, that we tie the turban and also have what they call the dupatta, which is the dupatta. Now women wearing dupatta, but in those days the men also used to wear the dupatta. So they say that we wear the turbans and the dupatta, and if you look at the Zamindari documents, you find that actually there was a tax on wearing a pagdi, which was known as a dastar shumari. So it was something that we get to hear about. The other thing is that some of the powerful sultans were trying to control the markets. Say, for example, the merchants from Multan were being advanced money to get horses from Multan. The other thing that you find is that there are a number of things that these guys find strange, even in the markets. I mean, they say one thing that they say about Indian artisans is that they are very good at copying things. Bernier, for example, Francois Bernier, who was a French doctor who was working for Dara Shikoh, says that Indian artisans are very good at copying things. You cannot make out whether it's a duplicate or the original one, but then he notes down that they don't have so many original ideas. The other thing that they say that a lot of things which are very, very expensive in Europe can be taken from India for a lot of trivialities. So they say that we don't have to pay much, and these guys don't realize the value of their product. That is something that you will hear from the market. So yeah, there is a difference between the people who understand the flow and the economy, how it is functioning, what is favorable. And in this, you find that the Indians will not have so much of idea about the value of their goods because the shipping industry in India was not so advanced. So they don't have that kind of exposure which the Europeans will have, and therefore they will exploit them. As far as the development of the caste is concerned, clearly the development of the caste is related to the creation of that team of laborers who work in the agrarian sector. And like I said to you, that there will be ideologies which will be developed to tell them that you are meant to do this work. I'll tell you one interesting thing. If you think about the Buddhism challenged a lot of things which Brahmanism was talking about. Okay? And Buddha said two things. One was that you have this whole idea of the transmigration of soul, and the other was karma. So he said that if you do good karma, you will come out of the cycle of transmigration of soul. Okay. And therefore, in a way, he was, and he said that there is going to be suffering. Suffering is for everybody. You can't escape that. So for the Brahmins, say for example, for the dominating caste and the exploiting class, the message from Buddhism was that you don't have to exploit people, otherwise you are going to suffer in the next birth. But interestingly, how they used it, they told the poor fellows, the poor, the low class / caste people, they told them that you had done very bad things in your last janam. That is why, because of your bad karma, today you are suffering. We are not making you suffer. It is your karma which is making you suffer. So they used it like that. So that is again about perspective, how you change the perspective, because Buddha was talking about something completely different. So then how it is used by a particular class of people and how do they manipulate it. The other thing is, about how the vernaculars challenge the Brahmanical setup. You see, what happened was that once the Brahmanical class became very exclusive. Okay? So once they don't include anybody who's from the lower caste class section in their discourse, then how do you make money out of them? You don't let them come inside your temples. You don't interact with them at all, except for, you know, your economic activities and the meager money that they get. So then the ambit of exploitation becomes restrained, but you can exploit them much more if you actually include them. So then you have the rise of what is known as Vaishnavism and the Bhakti movement, because then the Brahmins will actually loosen their, you know, their ideology, because now they will say that there is this new door opening, which is Bhakti, and through Bhakti you can, you know, you can join in this grand scheme of things. And gradually, if you study the whole of the Bhakti movement, you will find that the Bhakti will start with vernacular. A lot of local language will be used. People who are religious, you know, seers who are from the Vaishnava, from the Vaishya caste, not the Brahman, but the Vaishya caste, are people who are leading this movement. And also a lot of people who are of a caste even lower than the Vaishya will be leading. Eventually, especially the core Vaishnavism, it will eventually go to Sanskrit documents and Brahman priests. Over after 200-300 years, they will again have the upper hand in this. So it is a movement, you know, then that upper hand will again be challenged. Again, there'll be a tussle, and then, you know, the tussle goes on, because like I said to you, that the tussle is not religious. The tussle has always been economic, always. Between any religion or intra-religion, it has always been economic. If you think about the Shia and the Sunni Muslim divide, it has to do with political power. Clearly, it has to do with political power, absolutely. And all the other subsects of the Muslims that come out thereafter, all political divide and the economic gains which are attached to political power. So it's the same story with the Muslims, same story with the Christians, Protestant Catholic Reformation movement, and then how the Catholics will then reform themselves after the Protestant Reformation movement. The Catholic Church will also reform itself. That was also because of the political control of the church, because Germany wanted the church to step back from political and military control. So you have movement backed by Germany. So religion has always been used as a tool, and we must understand that it is spirituality which is very, very important, and we need to understand that. You know, religion is something that is between you and God. It is entirely a personal dialogue. Actually, it is such a personal dialogue that one should not allow outside agencies to manipulate your mind and heart in your dialogue with God. It has to be between the two of you. And if everyone understands this, तो ये जो ages से जो ये चला आ रहा है, exploiting the name of religion for various different agendas by people of all religions, that will stop. So I think that I've said enough. I hope.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am,
Maria, sure, you can ask your questions later now. Let's give others opportunity to. Maria.
Okay.
Hi, good afternoon, ma'am.
Hi.
Is my voice audible?
Yeah, but I can't see you. It'll be nicer if I could see you. Okay, fine.
Ma'am, the video is on, I think, because there's a lot of connectivity issue at my end.
Okay.
Maybe because of that.
No. We can see you now. Yeah, we can see you now. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you so much. The session was extremely nice, and it was really nice to hear you, because you just reminded me of my history teacher from school. So like, she used to make history so interesting. So it was exactly like that. So thank you so much, ma'am. I just wanted to know that, you know, as you discussed about the Turks and the Mughals, so like, you know, how can you put it as if, like, you know, that which particular, whether it was the Turks or the Mughals, who included more of dialogue practices during their tenure when they were, like, you know, ruling over India? So who amongst them we can say that, you know, included more of dialogue practices or skills? And when we talk about the Mughals, I mean, according to you, who can we term as like the ruler which, you know, included more of these mediation and dialogue skills to have a much more amalgamated society? So if you could just emphasize on that. And also, when did casteism, like you said that, you know, earlier, because casteism was nowhere in the picture, So when can we say that, it started getting included into all these, I mean, earlier religion and casteism was just put out and it was just about money minting. But then when did it come into picture? So if you could just please elaborate on that.
Right. Okay. So the first thing that you said, that who amongst these, from where can we mark that, who are the people who are trying to integrate, isn't it? Now, if you think about what Babur writes in the Babarnama, he says that when we won the Battle of Panipat and when he came to Agra after that, he says that all the people, they shut shop and they ran away because they were so scared of us, and they said that new people have come to rule over us. Now, please mark this, that the people in Agra are very scared of Babur, and they're saying that new people have come to rule over us. But actually, Delhi was anyways being ruled by Muslims even before Babur came. You have the whole of the Sultanate period. Delhi was the capital. Thereafter you have the Sayyids, you have the Lodhis, and then you have the Mughals. So that means the people of Delhi, again, which is the majority population, is of non-Muslims. They are not identifying the rulers by their religion, because if they would have been identifying them by their religion, they would have said, ki wo bhi Musalman the, ye bhi Musalman hai. But they are identifying him from his ethnicity, that he is someone new. That's one thing. The other thing that you would find is that why the Mughals are more known for, for integrative policies is because in the Mughal rule, there is a long continuity. The rule remains with the same family for a very long period in time. While in Sultanate, you find that after every little while, you have a new sultan and a completely new dynasty. And the other thing is, in the Mughal system, you have the Mansabdari system. So the power is actually redistributed into a number of officers, and a number of these officers are actually non-Muslim Rajas. So you have a lot of Rajput element in the Mughal, governance, and also a lot of Hindustani Muslim converts also in the Mughal governance, a lot of Shia Muslims also in the Mughal governance. While you find that amongst the Turks, this kind of an integration was just beginning. And then the power was highly concentrated in the hands of the Sultan during the Sultanate period. It wasn't so, it wasn't so diluted. Like in the Mughal period, you will find, although Akbar is very powerful, but his Mansabdars are also very powerful. If you think of Man Singh, Todarmal, Birbal, they're all very powerful people. Abdul Rahim Khana, they're all very powerful people. So that kind of a dilution you will not see during the Sultanate period. The Mughals were always very conscious of making the Mughals as a brand. They were brand conscious. So they have a continuity of policies. Amongst the Mughal rulers, the people whom we should, kind of point out very clearly that they were integrative. Humayun, we have Akbar, we have Jahangir, clearly. From Shah Jahan's period, we find that there is a change in policy. The change in policy is occurring not so much because of his religious inclinations, but because the Mughal center is becoming weak. And there is a lot of rebellion which is beginning to happen from the Zamindars. Most of the Zamindars are incidentally non-Muslims. So even if the rebellion is about land and property and money, the Zamindars are as a body generally non-Muslim. So if you are looking at, the religious divide, then you can always point out and say that, see, there is a religious divide. But again, it is a conflict between the regional powers and the central power. So it's again about money and political power. That's the thing. As far as the development of the caste is concerned, it's as early as the development of agriculture in the Gangetic Valley Plain. So, very, very old. It will run into the BCs. So you will find that this kind of a class division, which eventually will turn into a social division, which will be given the tag of a caste, will develop, which is, as old as the development of agriculture in the Gangetic Plain, which will run into BCs, 1000 BC or something like that. And this is known as the Great Economic Compromise. The development of the caste system, it's known as the Great Economic Compromise, because it is decided that for economic reasons, ideology like this is going to be unleashed, and it is fed with time. It's always fed with time. And then you'll always find that you'll find different ways to, exploit the other. So you always want to have, in a say, if you're talking about a gender-based setup, you find that the weaker section in a gender-based, socio-cultural system is the women, because they are physically and biologically weak. So there'll be 10 arguments which will be, kind of brought up against them, that they should be, this is their role assignment. And why you find a lot of women are exploited? Because they don't participate in economic activity. And wherever you find that women are economically independent, their position will be better otherwise. But inside house violence against working women is more, because they are more assertive. So there is more of conflict, because they are less docile. So there is more of conflict. So it's a very complex thing. So wherever you find a section which is weak and you can perpetuate that weakness, then you will use arguments to perpetuate weakness.
Thank you, ma'am.
I hope, Maria, you were okay with this.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Mushtaq Kinder.
Yeah, good afternoon, madam. Thank you for a very academic presentation. I have a lot of questions, but I would just confine myself with two.
Yes.
What was the position of dialogue if we just witnessed? Because in case of Islam and Muslims, because we have this transnational kind of linkages, and I will not completely agree that it was just money driven, because Muslims certainly believe that in this context we have to just proselytize and propagate the message of Islam to everybody, and it started with the four caliphs and rest, as you have very well delved. So don't you think in the Indian context also that religion as an ideology and the transnationalism in which Islam believes in ummah kind of understanding or solidarity. So was there a certain kind of othering with the Hindus, Ahle Hunud, or in many historical texts they use Kufristan for the Indian subcontinent. So was there a certain kind of othering, or it was just for the pragmatic reasons that whatever you have stated regarding Mughals and others? So that's one broad question. And a small one is related to witches, the witchcraft. So is it historically that this witchcraft and witch hunting is just associated with women only, or men also victims of the same, this witch hunt? Right?
Okay. Okay. Nice, Mushtaq. Okay. The first thing is this. You see, if you look at the idea of shahadat, say for example, the idea of being a shaheed, or the idea of, ghazi, say for an example, right? So let me just tell you one thing, that in the medieval warfare, the people who will be in the front line of a battlefield, they are sure to die. They're pakka going to die, because there's no way that they're going to be saved, because the armies collide face to face, right? So how you cannot promise these guys anything in this world. When they're not living, how do you promise that I'll give you money, I'll give you this, that, I'll give you a house, blah, blah, blah? It's useless for them. So you have to promise something which is not here, which is in the other world. So the idea that you will be a shaheed and you will go to Jannah, right? Now, if you look at, the first four Khalifas and the way they governed and the way they functioned and thought and operated is very different from what is going to happen soon after the first four Khalifas. So let's just put the Prophet and the first four Khalifas in one bracket. We'll have to, there's no other choice. We have to do that. And then you will find that there's another set of people who come. And then after a while, you will have another set which will come, which is perhaps far removed from the earlier practices of the early Muslims. Okay. Now, as far as, this idea of propagating Islam, you were saying that there is an underlying inclination that, there has to be a ummah and there has to be a community which has to be created. That was an idea which lies basically in the realm of idealism. It wasn't really being operated. I'll give you one example. Like I told you about Mahmud of Ghazni, like he was very greedy, known to be otherwise a champion of Islam, quote unquote. In the reign of Akbar, there was a set of the Sunni who said to Akbar that there was a Shia man whose name I'm forgetting. I think he's Ali Shirazi. Yeah, Ali Shirazi, who was buried next to Sheikh Nizamuddin Aulia in the complex where we have the grave of Sheikh Nizamuddin Aulia in Delhi, right? And a case came before Akbar that Ali Shirazi's dead body should be dug out from there because he is a Shia and Sheikh Nizamuddin Aulia was a Sunni, and therefore Sheikh Nizamuddin Aulia will be very uncomfortable in his grave because there is a Shia who's buried next to him. And Akbar ordered that the body be exhumed from there and buried somewhere else. This is being reported by Abdul Qadir Badayuni. He is also a contemporary, like I just said to you, writing about Akbar. He says that by doing this, Akbar not only would have displeased Allah, but he would have also, of course, displeased Sheikh Nizamuddin Aulia, because Sheikh Nizamuddin Aulia didn't stand for this kind of sectarianism. Okay, so if you think of some of these rulers, the kind of punishments that they give, like I'll give you another example. Muhammad bin Tughlaq used to punish that people's hands will be amputated, people's tongue will be cut off, kaan kaat lenge, naak kaat lenge. Are those punishments Sharai? No, they aren't Sharai. They're not justified by the Sharia. If you think of Alauddin Khilji, in Alauddin Khilji's reign, a rapist was castrated. That was the punishment. Was it Sharai? No, it wasn't. Although it was a tough punishment, but it was not Sharai. So the ulama always said ki Sharai inke punishment nahi. I'll give you another big example. According to the Shariat, the maximum tax that you can take on the produce from the people is 1/3 of the produce. 1/3. The tax that these guys used to take from Alauddin Khilji onwards is more than 1/3. It is 1/2. And in some cases, jahan pe level of sustenance is, low, like say, for example, hum log ka jo Ganga Yamuna Doab ka area, jahan pe zameenen bahut fertile hain, they would even take 3/4. There is an author whose name is Qazi Muhammad Allah, who's writing in the 18th century. He says that Muslim rulers of Hindustan, if they were saying that we are taking kharaj, which is a Sharai tax on agrarian produce, which is 1/3 according to the Shariat, then they were lying, because they were not taking the tax as per the Sharia. They were taking a tax which was much higher than that. So you saying that if you look at Balban is the man who said that in the court there has to be sajda and pabos. So everyone had to do sajda to the Sultan. Everyone had to do pabos, kissing of the feet of the Sultan. Balban, he's the 3rd or the 4th Sultan of the Delhi Sultanate. And after Balban, we get to know that pabos had become such a strong practice in the court of the Delhi Sultanate that it was extended to another practice which is known as the Zameen Bos. So if you had to meet the Sultan in the Delhi Sultanate, who's a Muslim Sultan, you have to go on kissing the floor. That is, kissing the mud 5 times before you reach him. And if he's kind enough, then he'll allow you to kiss his feet and do sajda to him. Are they Muslims? Are these guys Muslims? Do they have the right to say that we have come here to spread Islam? This was their Islam. So first they have to put their own house in order. And if they claimed it, they were making a fake claim, because they were using the other poor Muslims, telling them you come and fight for us because then you will become a shaheed and you will go to Jannah. And we are spreading Islam here. Pehle apna Islam to dekh lo, because you will only be accountable for yourself. First accountable for yourself. Then only you will be accountable for doing any other big work. So I think it was definitely about economic issue. They were not thinking of creating any ummah here. No, they weren't. They were fooling the people. Just like
the second question about witchcraft.
Yeah. Can you please tell me, Mushtaq, just briefly, what was the second question?
Yeah, second question was the witchcraft. Is it associated just with women, or we find that also men?
Yeah, mostly with women. Mostly with women. If you look at the data in India, it's almost completely 100% about women. Almost 100% about women. Yeah, because it has to do again with physical weakness and general, the capacity to kind of exploit them. Let me just tell you what are the punishments which are given to witches in today. 2019, 2018, 2020. They are made to eat excreta, drink urine, their hair is shaven, they are paraded nude through the village, they are raped by n number of villagers. This is the punishment for witchcraft. What is the difference between the witches and the guys who are punishing them for being witches? I don't get that. So it's, you know, and the other thing is, like I said to you, a number of laws have been made, but in some states, no cases have been actually reported in the police. No cases have come to the law courts where a witch is fighting a case that I'm not a witch, they did this to me. So that means the laws are ineffective. They are not effectively being used. So yeah, it is a tool against women. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
And ma'am, if I may add to this, if you look at the data of India and look at the map, you'll find most of the witchcraft is connected to the tribal area, like Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and Orissa. Highest is Orissa and this thing. So naturally, poor, ignorance, women, nothing to eat, nothing to bow back, and then witchcraft is being done. If these are the red area, if you look at the map of India, you know, so it is again something to do with economics and politics both, and Naxalite area and something like that, and power structure and everything. Sorry to interrupt, but that is what I wanted to add.
No. Like welcome comment. Yes, absolutely.
Now, Vishal, you want to ask something?
Yeah, I would like to go back. Ma'am, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Vishal.
Yeah, I would like to go back to my first question, the market one. I always find the market a very interesting place. My question is that how a foreigner would be negotiating in an Indian market which is so vivid in terms of language. We also come to know that how the languages itself are developing through those dialogues which are happening in those markets. So this is my question. So if you can like give me a brief sketch or something.
Yeah. All the foreign merchants, right from the Sultanate period, we know that they used to use brokers for negotiating. So these whom we usually call the dalals. So dalals were operative all the time, and they would have a cut on any deal which was being made from the buyer and the seller. And the interesting thing is that if as a seller, if you were a poor seller, then they would try to take, in fact, a bigger cut from you. And a lot of these merchants, they did not know the language, of course. They didn't know how to, travel through the various villages. And sometimes some things were in great demand. Say, for example, in India, cotton was in huge demand. Indian cotton was always in demand. Saltpeter, jisse barood banta tha, that was in demand. Indigo, jisse kapde range jate the, that was in demand. So there was a lot of international demand for these things. So these guys, the foreign merchants could not have operated without the dalals. Now, somebody like Alauddin Khilji, who hated intermediaries, he hated dalali anywhere. So he said that we are going to, fix the price of everything, and we'll have a centralized market system so that the merchants can come here and they can buy whatever they want to buy. So he was trying to regulate the market. The other thing that he was trying to do was that, say, supposing, Vishal, if you are a very rich man, right? So if you want to buy, say, 50 meters of brocade, or you want to buy 1 kg of gold, say for an example, then the government puts a cap that you can only buy, say half a kg of gold, and you can buy only, 50 meters of brocade. If you want 100 meters of brocade, you have to give an application to Alauddin Khilji. And if you want to buy more gold, you'll have to give an application. Then the application will be run through your accounts, and they will find out that from where did you get the money to, to aspire to buy so much of brocade or so much of gold. So they would check out into that. So market was, of course, an important place. And it was also a place where a lot of gossip went around. So a lot of gossip went around. If you read about the death of Akbar, say for example, you have this amazing document called the Ardh Kathanak, if you might have heard about it. Banarsi Das was a merchant in Akbar's period. And he writes that how he tries trying to, become a jewel trader. And he fails. But he writes that when Akbar died, Banarsi Das fainted because he thought that the market is going to collapse. Everything is going to collapse because Akbar is dead. What is going to happen now? So peace and peace, which was coming from a centralized form of government, was important. The fact that people will not loot each other was important. If you had a strong governance and you had a government which supported, the security of the merchants, otherwise things would collapse. Whenever there was a tension between the sons of any Mughal emperor, the East India Company took out an order for its officers that don't invest any money in India at all, because there can be any kind of political chaos at any point in time, and pull out all the money from wherever you have. Now, this we are talking about the 17th century. They were so particular. So in case if there was any political turmoil which was expected, they'll pull out all the money from the market. So, these were all closely connected issues. And they always had sarraf, money changers. Money changers were there in every village. You can imagine that. Every village had a sarraf who would deal in currencies. So foreign currency exchange was available in India in every village, in medieval.
Yaud, your mic turned on. Please turn it off. Yaud, Yaud, can you hear me? Okay. Yes, ma'am, sorry for that. Ma'am?
Yes.
Are you? Yeah, okay. We have 3 more. You done with this question, by the way? Do you have something to add to the answer you were giving to the previous question, or do I let people ask the questions?
I think because I've said that never sarrafs, so we used to help these merchants, and the brokers were always exploitative.
Yeah.
That's why at one point Muhammad bin Tughlaq was thinking of banning them, Alauddin Khilji was thinking of banning them, Akbar was thinking of banning them, but no one could do without the dalal. And they were so notorious, that's why you find that dalal is also used as a gali. It's an abusive term, actually. Yeah.
Yes. Now we have Urusa. Urusa wants to ask a question, and we have 2 more people after her.
Hi, good afternoon, ma'am. It was a very wonderful session, Professor. So I have not exactly, a question and an observation as well. Based on what I am, where my research is presently, I feel that history is very rarely written about those who do not create it. We always look at history from the prism of the elite. Like we'll talk about the kings, their economy, their politics, and things about that. What I do not see is that, like right now, because the aim is to contextualize it. How do we take what we had in the historical sense and contextualize it in the present sense, in the present popular sense, not in the elite sense? Because the government will say anything. On paper, I don't know if I should be saying India is a secular country, but we see what is happening in the popular sense, right? So what I find, even when it comes to dialogue, which brings me to 2 questions, is that how do we translate what was there in history, and how do we translate what was there in the elite sense into the popular sense, and how does that historical dialogue find continuation in the present sense? Because I have been finding it very difficult. I'm trying to look into pre-partition political mobilization in Jammu and Kashmir and intercultural dialogue thereof. It's very difficult for me to find instances where what was being said by these leaders was actually translating into what was happening on ground. It was completely different. People did not love each other. They did not have any long lost love for each other. There were instances where people were indulging in dialogue with each other, but there were massive instances where they were not. They were just not translating into what the leaders were saying. So I find it very difficult to find a continuation between, what was there in the history, what was there, what our books tell us, to what was there on ground. The popular narratives do not coincide with the historical narratives. Discourses are very different. I'm sorry?
Urusa, your voice is breaking.
Ma'am, did you hear me? Should I repeat myself?
No, I've heard you. I've heard you. But
so I do not know how to, like, you know, transform that historical discourse into the popular discourse right now. It just becomes very difficult.
Right.
Yeah, because popular narratives are a very new thing. It's just very recently that someone will say, you know, this happened to me, this is my life, this came in, I went here and this happened. What we have from history is just very elitist accounts, if I may use the word elitist. So it just brings me to the question, in what context do we use the word dialogue, and how do we translate that into, so as we are able to, you know, continue the same thing.
Okay. Yeah. Urusa, see, the first thing is that there was another a parallel school of historians that came up, which is known as the subaltern school, right? And the subaltern school speaks about, you know, the ignored classes that you were talking about, the artisans, the peasants, the poor guys, you know. And so you have to look then into the works of the subalterns, because that's a school of people who have written a lot. And the recent context, let me just tell you, there's a work which was written by Vijaya Ramaswamy, who was a professor in JNU. Her book has come on the artisans and the peasants. Have a look at that. Irfan Habib's new book has just come a month ago, which is Braj Bhoom in the Mughal times. You could have a look at that. And as far as you're connecting the past and the present in a more, you know, in a more current context is concerned, there is a book which has come by a man called Manimugdh Sharma. Manimugdh Sharma, he works for the Times of India. He's written a book called Allahu Akbar, which connects Akbar's policies and their relevance to the modern times. So since he works in the newspaper, he has actually kind of, you know, seen everything which was coming in the newspapers, right from the pre-independence days up till now about Akbar. So he's, you know, studied all of that. So that is a tool that he has used because he had that tool, because he works in a newspaper. As a student, you can use other tools. If you're not getting information, say directly in the historical sources per se, then you look at literature. What is literature saying? What are poems saying? What are paintings saying? What are buildings saying? So, you know, you enhance the tools that you use to reconstruct history, because that is what the challenge is, that you reconstruct areas which are blank and you give them a face. So as a researcher, I think that's what you have to do. And if you don't have direct access, then you have to create a route for access to a difficult path. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Nitya Prakash, and then Eid.
Yeah. Hello, ma'am. Thank you so much for the wonderful lecture. It was really very, very enlightening. And so my question, and also like a bit of, my own reflections, is that what you presented is such a thorough Marxist understanding of history, where class and capital, they come across as a very huge signifiers of our understanding, and mainly linked with the division of labor, that how one class ended up silencing the other classes, or so to say, in terms of economy also, and how it created its own kind of knowledge, which is still thriving. But ma'am, along with that, what you talked about witchcraft is making me think that how gender has also been such a pertinent part of it. And, like the whole idea of witchcraft somewhere, it's making me somewhere think that whenever a woman does not fit into the phallic order, it is a masculine fantasy somewhere to ostracize the women. So even in the witches, we see the older women, the low class women, women who are so-called not productive in the patriarchal economy, not like women don't work, but their work has no market value according to an ideology. So I think that throughout the history, we see this trajectory of silencing, of the voice, especially pertaining to women. And we'll find women in tokens, of course. I mean, there are some a bit here and there. But, like last lecture, what Mr. Kamar Agha, he said that, how dialogue has to be based on logic. And where today we see that how much of our dialogue is so not rational and deprived of logic. And such kind of narratives has been coming. You talked about Panchatantra. It goes even our fairy tale stories like Snow White. There has to be an evil mother. So it's only the mother and the women we see the split. This where she's idolized but also demonized. We don't find such discourses and narratives when it comes to men. So how do you see that as this feminist positioning? Like, is there any scope when the history can be rewritten? I'm sure it is being rewritten, not like that. So I would like to take your insight on that. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. See, for women, I think it's a long journey because, because this, a lot of things that religion, religions talk about the position of women, any religion. Religions give an important position to women, but it's the societal practices and also the economic situationing of women, which is, kind of putting them at a disadvantage. Coming to history, you find that till the time there was no concept of a family and, people settling down in one place. It's with the concept of the family that women, you will find that their position goes down. I'll give you an example. There's a book by Professor Amar Farooq. It's called The Early Social Formations. If you read that book, it talks about early social formations, and also state formation and so on. So it says that when women stopped hunting, gathering, earlier they were also hunters, gatherers. If you look at the Bhim-Bedika painting, the Bhim-Bedika paintings are some of the earliest representations of women in painting in India. So you find that the women were, hunters. You get that. But as time passes, you will not find women as hunters. If you look at the period of Kanishk, you will find that women were his bodyguards. He had women bodyguards. But once you move further away from there, you will not find any more women bodyguards, right? So you find that they are being pushed out of activity in a number of places. The other interesting thing is that some social ideas developed where they said that it was a disgrace to make their women work because it seems, that they are in need of money and that's why their women are working. But there were some societies in which women kept working. Say, for example, the Jats that I was talking about, right? So the Jats settled in the region of Mathura. A lot of Jats are settled in Mathura, Bharatpur, all that area, Haryana. So you find that wahan pe the position of women was stronger in comparison to other places, and the religious practices also that they had are different from other places. Like for example, Holi in Barsana. In Holi, I don't know whether you know about the Latmar Holi of Mathura, in which the women beat up the men with those lathis, So that is all Jat-dominated area. Now, what happened in Jat? See how this works. In the Jat-dominated area in Haryana, till the time we were not independent, the women used to help the men in watering the fields because Haryana has a low water table. Even now it has a low water table, of course. So they used to help them in watering the fields. So they were in a position where they decided whom did they want to marry because they were participating in the economic activity in a very key position. After independence, in the 5-year plan, it was decided that Haryana will come under the green belt. So the government made special arrangements for irrigation facilities in Haryana. So the role that the women played there as helping men in the field, that role became redundant because the government set up tube wells and irrigation. So earlier the women used to choose whom they want to marry. Now suddenly the men amongst the Jats, they said that you can't choose whom you want to marry. And that is why you find that there's so many honor killings in this region because the girls still feel that they have a right to choose while the society says that no, you don't have. So it was a historical independence that they had, which has now been taken away from them because their state has progressed. So, it's like a really difficult kind of a chain. As far as Muslim women are concerned in particular, Muslim feminists, generally, they claim their right not from the government, but from Islam itself. Because Islam itself gave them a lot of, very, very advanced kind of rights, which Muslim men find it difficult to recognize. Because what you would find here popularly is that Muslim men can marry 4 times. But if you actually read that portion in the Quran, it says you can marry 4 times only if you can treat all your wives equally, and we know that you will not be able to do it. So you have the answer right there, you know. So, but then the hadith, the whole discourse which has been selected by interpreters in such a way, and the same goes for the Hindu women also, because earlier there was no Upnayan ceremony. Once there was that Upnayan ceremony, which was, you know, the Janeu. So once you have the Upnayan ceremony, the Brahman said that for the women, the Upnayan ceremony is equal to marriage. And for the boys, the Upnayan ceremony is wearing the Janeu and starting education. So the moment you get this divide that they will study and she will get married, you finished. You know, so it's historic, and it's, you know, like, it's a long war, I think. It's a, because the situation is still very grim. Look at the domestic violence during the COVID-19 lockdown. It's horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. There's a man who cut off his wife's hand because she used to talk on the mobile all the time during this lockdown period. I read it, I think it was maybe a month ago. We just chopped off her hand. So, yeah.
Finally, Said.
Thank you, Farhat. For a person like me from out of this region, it was really enlightening, and to hear another perspective. Yeah, as you know, I'm from a town which is about 50 kilometers away from the original hometown of Babur. Yeah, Andijan. I'm from Osh.
Said, can you speak a little louder?
Okay. Am I audible now?
Yes, better, much better.
Okay. Okay. It was really engaging, interesting to hear like another point. As a person from outside of this region, like Southeast Asia, it was like ideas were really new. I'm from a place which is 50 kilometers away from Babur's hometown. So I know little about him. I didn't have much chance to learn about him. I know some poems from his life. I wanted to ask a question about like the point of his poet being poet, yeah. So as we know, he is the author of Babur Nama. He wrote himself, and like he was kind of from the point of spirituality, he was kind of sophist himself, right? I want to hear some comments about this point. Thank you.
Yeah, you're right. Babar was a poet, author, of course, author par excellence, because his autobiography is translated in n number of languages. He was very spiritual. He was God-fearing. I'll give you one instance from the Babar Nama itself. Babar and his friends were once on a party, and they made fun of somebody. If you read the Babar Nama, he says that everyone was, you know, reciting a couplet, and in that couplet, Babar made fun of somebody, you know. And then after 2 days, Babar started vomiting blood. And he writes in the Babar Nama that once when I started vomiting blood, I knew that from where has this punishment come? That is, the punishment is coming from God, because he had broken somebody's heart by being rude. So he says that I knew from where this punishment has come. And then I said, and then he writes a poem. He writes a poem in which he's addressing his tongue. So he says, "Oh tongue, if you don't know how to manage yourself in the battlefield of words, then don't enter into this battlefield. If you don't know how to pull your reins when it is time to pull your reins, then don't enter into this battlefield." And then he says that because of you, that is his tongue, he says, because of you, my insides are bloody. because he's vomiting blood. And he says that I promised that day that I'm going to be very careful whatever I speak to people, otherwise I will be, punished. And he always writes, he writes many times. He also says that you should forgive people. That there is only one thing that he has written twice in the Babarnama, and that is, he says that if you have to take revenge from somebody, leave him to time, because time is the best of the revenge takers. Don't do anything, just leave, sit back, and you will see the dead bodies of your enemies floating in the waters. So that is something that he says twice in the Babarnama. So forgiveness, patience, and also God-fearing he was. Yeah. Absolutely.
And also, as far as I know, he was very homesick. I heard some of his poems. Yeah, he was very homesick. He missed food like original to his hometown, and some fruits. And I just wanted,
melon.
Yeah,
melon.
It's very popular there. And I just wanted to comment on Mushtaq's Islamic mission. There is even hadith of the Prophet saying that the best time is the time where I am present. Then it goes weekends. So the best time was where he was present personally. Then the love of, or the connection weakened, and as Islam spread around the world, it was subjective anyway. It had to be subjective. It had to be dependent on the people's personal subjective interpretation, even books, right? So that's nature of humanity. Unfortunately, it has to be like that. And his only prayer, as far as I know, which was not accepted, was this difference of ideas, interpretations. Like the fitna, which is called fitna of the ummah. There will be different of scholars, different opinions, and sometimes they will clash among themselves. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Nice comments. Very nice. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much, all of you, and thank you very much, Professor Farhat Nasreen. With this, we have come to the end of our second session.